In the Californian desert, a Hollywood hotspot put to a sinister purpose.
In that area, microphones and wiring were hidden.
An ancient city in Turkey, standing on hallowed ground.
It once housed a fragment of the cross, meaning the cross on which Jesus Christ was crucified.
A Scottish relic immortalized by Gothic horror.
Imagine a man in a dark cloak stalking its hallways.
And ruins in the Baltics that have chilling echoes of modern-day war in Europe.
Recent events in Ukraine can show us the dangers of having an isolated group of people from Russia in a border country.
Decaying relics. Ruins of lost worlds. Sites haunted by the past. Their secrets waiting to be revealed. In the middle of a dusty plain, 40 miles west of San Francisco, are the vestiges of a debauched institution.
It's kind of desolate land, and then all of a sudden you see a strange brick building.
It has been abused, it has been spray painted, it has gone to rack and ruin.
The harsh California sun illuminates a sparse interior.
It was clearly a grand structure, but now you're really just walking around a shell of a place.
Rubble litters the floor, and little eddies of dust kick up as you walk from room to room.
Once a retreat where the rich and famous cut loose, it would soon become something a world apart.
It was hidden, classified, and given a mysterious new name.
Carol Jensen is a local historian who first came here as a young girl.
So you can imagine 8-year-old Carol. Hi! Boom! You know, I'm off to explore. Of course, I wasn't supposed to keep out, right? So I went in immediately.
This was once a deluxe hotel, inaugurated in 1914.
In the lobby, there would have been chairs, palm trees, paintings. There are approximately 40-plus rooms in this hotel, and it could easily accommodate 100 guests.
It's pretty desolate and secluded, but it doesn't make much sense why people would want to come here.
Hidden in the grounds lies a clue.
This is the White Sulphur Springs, and this is one of the 50 springs on the site. Every one of these springs is loaded with sulfur, magnesium, and other chemicals found today in modern medicine.
Visitors believed that the mineral waters were a tonic for many different ails.
Thanks to these supposed healing powers, by the early 1900s, the Byron Hot Springs Hotel had gained quite a reputation.
This destination resort was really attractive, not only to the international visitors, but also those involved in the fledgling movie industry in Southern California.
Clark Gable, Mae West, Charlie Chaplin, anybody who was everybody in early Hollywood came to take the waters.
Its remote location, far from the eyes of the press and the law, soon ensured their repeat custom.
Prohibition had begun in 1920, and while that meant that people couldn't legally get a drink, that didn't really seem to affect those who were visiting the Byron Hotel.
There was demand for celebrities to have a place where you could drink your bootleg liquor that was far away from the gossip columnists, far away from the paparazzi.
Over here, we would have had card tables, ping pong. There's also gambling, poker, one-armed bandits, otherwise known as slot machines, and of course, a bar.
And this is a place where you could come to drink until you dropped, and then the next day, you could get the hangover cured by the magical medicinal waters. This was a full-service hotel.
But the good times wouldn't last. The Wall Street crash of 1929 had a crippling impact on businesses throughout the land.
The stock market crash affects everything, everything. And the Byron Hot Springs is no exception.
The hotel limped on for more than a decade before it drew the attention of the US military.
It's sometimes useful to have a big facility that's far away from prying eyes.
In April 1942, as America's war was just beginning, Captain Earl L. Edwards arrived at the aging hotel.
Why is an American Army captain coming out here to the middle of nowhere? He's on a scouting expedition. He's not looking for the enemy. He's looking for a place to put the enemy.
They spent $100,000 fitting out this new top secret facility, and they gave it a mysterious new name, P.O. Box 651. Eventually, it would become known as Camp Tracy.
By December that year, it was ready to receive its new guests, prisoners of war.
They arrived under armed guard, and they had no idea when or if they would be allowed to leave.
So originally, Camp Tracy was mainly supposed to be for German and Italian POWs. But over time, it was predominantly inhabited by Japanese POWs.
But this wasn't just a prison camp. Its true purpose lies hidden in the basement.
We're now in the interrogation rooms where military intelligence personnel met with the high-value prisoners of war. Each interrogation room was lined with acoustic tiles for purposes of soundproofing. So what goes on in these rooms stays in these rooms.
The US intelligence officers relied on cooperation, not coercion.
We're not thinking interrogation in terms of waterboarding or thumbscrews or physical violence.
They had to be opened up carefully. And that was the task of clever, well-trained interrogators. The intelligence people would create an environment psychologically designed to make people want to talk.
They'd let them have a drink, they'd let them sit down, and they kind of developed a rapport with the prisoner to try and get information out of them.
When I was learning how to be an interrogator, we were taught to use the interrogation room as a theater, as a stage. We would create an environment to make it comfortable to talk.
Once the interrogations were over, the POWs were returned to their cells on the top floor. And that's where the real intelligence work began.
There were 22 rooms, 44 prisoners of war here on this floor. And this is the only floor where the prisoners would have been housed. I am turning into what would have been a bedroom.
Once a POW went back into his room, He was very easily able to communicate with people in his cell and outside his cell. So the POW might be telling everybody, oh boy, I just told them a ton of lies.
Little did they know, US personnel were counting on this.
All we're seeing today is the raw reinforced concrete and brick facade. When it became Camp Tracy, the military dropped to the ceiling and put in a false ceiling in that area. Microphones and wiring were hidden. So there's microphones hidden in the light fixtures. There's microphones hidden in the vents in the toilet area. There's microphones in the lamps. Microphones everywhere. They're all running with copper insulated wire. And that wire runs through the false ceiling over to the elevator shaft, down to the ground floor where the listening post is.
Pretty much the whole place was bugged. Basically, anywhere a prisoner could go, there was a team of US personnel listening in.
In its 3 years as an interrogation facility, reams of raw intelligence were produced here.
So it's pretty staggering. About 5,000 Japanese POWs were brought to the mainland during the war, and 3,500 of them were interrogated at Camp Tracy.
There were about 6,500 pages of intelligence that were gathered from their interrogations.
Extensive pre-screening in the Pacific Theater and on arrival in the US ensured that the men possessed valuable strategic-level information.
You want to get officers, you want to get people with an understanding of force structure to help the whole armed forces build a complex and detailed intelligence picture of the enemy.
One such officer would provide just that. Eikichi Saito of the Japanese Navy gave detailed descriptions of their naval bases, with sketches, information on troop positions, specifications of bombers, and assessments on soldiers' morale. Some of the information gathered here would play a decisive role in ending America's war in the Pacific.
Thanks to this non-violent interrogation, we were able to make decisions as to where and when, or if, we should be dropping nuclear weapons on Japan.
On the 1st of September 1945, one day before Imperial Japan officially surrendered, Camp Tracy was mothballed and stripped bare. Now, Carol hopes that the former Byron Hot Springs Hotel can return to its halcyon days.
When you look at a place with this kind of history, this kind of architecture, this setting, I mean, really, all you can do is cry. Heaven knows, nothing would fill my heart more than to see the Byron Hot Springs not only restored, but turned once more into a destination resort.
Perched on the cliffs of Cruden Bay in Scotland is a sprawling ruin that helped inspire the world's most famous Gothic villain.
There's absolutely nothing to obscure the view of this place, so you can see it from miles and miles away.
And clearly built in a strategic defensive position, right up against steep cliffs, with further protection from ravines and ramparts.
There's bricks, there's mortar, there's different types of limestone and granite.
It becomes apparent that this has gone through a number of building phases. It's been extended and added to over a long period of time, perhaps over many centuries.
You can identify turrets and crenellations and dramatic arches. And then you have these circular towers connected by curtain walls.
Battles, secret agents, treachery, links to the Spanish Armada. This castle has enough intrigue to fill several thrillers.
But at its core is an unmistakable feature that links to the castle's most enduring mystery.
Imagine a man stalking its hallways, sweeping his cloak dramatically, engaging with dark thoughts.
There's one thing that attracts people to this place today, and that's its connection with a certain creature of the night.
This sprawling relic is Slane's Castle. Author Mike Shepard grew up in nearby Cruden Bay, with this epic ruin dominating the horizon.
Slane's Castle was a very dramatic feature not far from my house. And of course, I wanted to investigate the history and started digging in. Very little is known. There's a lot of secrets here.
In the late 16th century, the Hay family were the predominant power in eastern Aberdeenshire. Francis Hay, the 9th Earl of Errol, held that power at Old Slane's Castle, just 5 miles from this site. Until Scotland threw out the Catholic religion and James VI became Scotland's first Protestant king.
The 9th Earl of Errol actually converted to Catholicism, and he started to plot against the Protestant king, James.
The Earl joined others in an uprising, and the battle took place just 50 miles from here. But the Catholic forces were so weakened that the cause was over.
Now guilty of treason, the 9th Earl fled abroad. And King James took his revenge on the Earl's beloved Slane's Castle.
The Earl had been scheming with the Spanish. In 1594, King James had the castle blown up for this treachery.
A few years later, the Earl renounced his Catholicism and returned from exile.
And he decides to rebuild his castle on his family seat.
You can see the original tower, built in the cliff with its foundation starting halfway up this craggy inlet.
It would become known as New Slane's Castle. In its shadow, a legend was born.
It was extensively rebuilt in 1837 as a huge mansion house.
And it was this palatial home that author Bram Stoker stumbled upon in the 1890s during a very particular search.
He systematically set out to find a place where he could do his writing and started to walk down the coast towards Aberdeen, looking for a special place.
He came across this beautiful old castle and he examined it, and then he went down, he explored the fishing village that was a short walk away, and he really fell in love with the place.
Stoker telegraphed his wife Florence, calling for her and their son Noel to join him at the Kilmarnock Arms Hotel in Cruden Bay. Then, just a part-time writer, his discovery of this location proved inspirational and life-changing, as stories began streaming out of his mind and onto paper.
2 of his books were set here in Cruden Bay, The Watter's Moo and The Mystery of the Sea. And these books came either side of his most famous book, possibly the most famous Gothic novel of all time, Dracula.
Bram Stoker spent a lot of time researching Dracula here, and he took inspiration from local fishermen and other local folks that he interviewed, getting stories of ghostly tales and legends and lore.
In a number of ways, you can see how this was the inspiration for Dracula's castle in Transylvania.
Some intriguing connections to Slane's castle emerge from the pages of the novel. When the story's protagonist arrives at the front entrance.
Jonathan Harker is dropped off at Castle Dracula, but his mysterious driver suddenly disappears, leaving him alone, standing in front of this enormous Gothic edifice. He's in the middle of nowhere.
And he goes out to the front door, and he is totally astonished to find that there's no bell, there's no door knocker, and he starts to panic.
Now, Slane's castle similarly had no doorbell or knocker, despite being a huge palace-like castle. That can't be a coincidence, can it?
But suddenly the doors creak open, and he is greeted by the Count himself, who leads him through to a distinctive room.
From above, you can clearly see this 8-sided octagonal room at the heart of the castle.
Now, I've actually got a photograph from 1900 which shows the octagonal room inside the castle here. And it's exact look-alike for the room described by Bram Stoker in Dracula. A small octagonal room with a single lamp hanging from the ceiling.
But Stoker wasn't just using the castle for visual references. He seemed to be immersing himself into Dracula's world.
Bram's wife and son actually commented on his strange behavior.
He was a totally changed personality while he was writing Dracula. They were all frightened of him when he was writing.
According to his wife, he'd march onto the beach pacing up and down, and he could be seen sitting perched like a giant bat on the rocks of the shore.
His son said that he was very brooding and very difficult to reach and to deal with during that time.
And there's been speculation since that he was tapping into the method acting techniques, and like the best method actor, lost himself in the role of the blood-sucking count.
In May 1897, Dracula was published, forever cementing the Count and his castle into the popular imagination. Stoker continued to visit Cruden Bay until 1910, just a few years before his passing, by this time a celebrated novelist. In 1916, the 20th Earl of Errol was forced to sell New Slains, ending more than 300 years of Hay family ownership. Soon after, it was partially demolished and stripped bare. The castle is a shell of its former glory, but there is increasing recognition of the connection between this place and Bram Stoker.
The 125th anniversary of the publication of Bram Stoker's Dracula was celebrated here in 2022.
And Dacre Stoker, the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker, decided that the most appropriate place to celebrate that was here in Cruden Bay, including a visit to Slane's Castle here. And that's starting to excite a lot of interest, not just here in Scotland, but throughout the world.
A sleepy suburban town at the eastern end of Estonia sits a stone's throw from the Russian border.
At first, it doesn't appear as if anything is immediately strange.
As you look a little bit closer, things aren't quite as they should be. There's trees growing out of parts of the infrastructure.
You see a school that has obviously not been used for teaching for a long time. There's a clinic that is completely abandoned.
You see that, in fact, a whole wall might be missing from a house, or that the building doesn't have a roof.
you quickly realize that there are blocks and blocks of these abandoned homes, that it's not just a small area that's been left to rot.
But there's little to explain what ripped this place apart.
There's no bullet holes, there's no bomb craters or anything like that. It's not like a war zone.
The only possible clue is a railroad heading straight for the Russian border. In the late 1990s, a community still enjoyed the facilities of this well-planned town.
It was a restaurant 20 years ago, 25 maybe, yes. I went here to eat, but everything is destroyed. And everything collapsed, and people went away, and they start to just destroy.
Prit Orab's family first arrived here in the 1890s. In 1929, his grandfather Richard took over the farm as a young man, but his tenure wouldn't last long. Early in the Second World War, Soviet troops occupied Estonia, confiscating land for the war effort, including the Orab family farm. Following the war, Stalin stamped out any resistance to Soviet rule.
Estonia was incorporated into a bigger state called the USSR. That meant destroying, effectively, Estonian independence, Estonian individuality.
What remains bears witness to Stalin's post-war policies and their lasting impact on peace in Europe. This is the Stalinist town of Vivikona.
Now you can see how this city is laid in a grate. All the houses in the same sort of pattern. Oh, let's have a look what they have seen here. Some kind of window, yeah, some pipes, water system, broken walls, can fall down. Pretty big rooms here.
These are high-quality houses and different buildings built with quality materials.
Vivikona was constructed in the late 1940s. Stalin was pursuing a policy of intense Russification, moving loyal ethnic Russians into republics like Estonia.
Stalin brutally exports something like 20,000 Estonians to Siberia, and then imports Soviet citizens to fill the towns of Estonia.
"2,000 ethnic Russians were drafted into Vivikona. An open-cast mine on the edge of town reveals why.
Oil shale that's in Estonia is called kyrgyzite. It's a particularly rich organic material. It's the second most rich oil shale deposit in the world outside of Australia.
Oil shale, like coal, can be mined and used as fuel, and Stalin had his eye on the region's rich reserves.
A big railway line was built all the way into Russia to move the shale oil to the motherland.
The rail line used to go from the station in Vivikona straight to Leningrad, full of that shale oil from the nearby mine.
The Soviets increased shale oil production from around 1 million tons in 1945 to over 5 million a decade later. It helped fuel the Soviet economy and its relentless pursuit of superpower status. With such large-scale mining, by the 1970s, they'd bled the ground dry. Yet, it was the Soviet system that would keep the town alive.
people were given funding to live. It was a socialist economy that allowed people to live there, even though the main source of work and labor in that region had gone.
But Soviet backing wouldn't last forever. Although the collapse of communism in 1989 paved the way for Estonian independence, it came at a price.
State subsidies for food and basic products disappeared.
That meant that all of a sudden prices are skyrocketing at the same time that wages are gone.
Without the protection of the Soviet state, Vivikona's ethnic Russians found themselves in a precarious position.
So what will these Russians who've lived in Estonia for generations do? As the Soviet Union is gone and Estonia is independent and free, where will their loyalties lie?
Maybe 20% went to east, it meant to Russia back, because they are afraid about his life. They are maybe connected with KGB or army. Most of people, they just escaped. And if the people don't have even money for escaping, they stay here and surviving somehow. And they lost his meaning of life.
Estonia's journey to independence was proving a bumpy ride. Many were facing desperate times.
The reputation of this town as being filled with abandoned buildings soon begins to spread to the area around it. So you have all sorts of people coming that aren't with the best intentions.
People started raiding houses for metals and other things that they could sell to make money that they could then use for food, narcotics, drugs, whatever. It started a sort of spiraling degradation of the town.
During the 90s, the daytime it was okay, but when it's dark and night, it was dangerous. We're just destroying everything, and the local people was of course disturbed about this. And it was a horrible time.
Looting left large swathes of Stalin's once proud town ravaged and empty. But Estonia began returning nationalized properties, and Prit, armed with just a bicycle and mobile phone, returned to renovate his family farm in 1999. This town was built on mining and a need for energy. In 2022, a new energy crisis engulfed Europe when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, prompting a revival of Estonia's shale oil industry. And for some remaining Vivikona residents, the cultural divide is being highlighted once again.
You have people in Estonia, especially in Vivikona, who are ethnic Russians, who speak Russian, who follow that culture, who follow Russian media. And this idea of being separate, as we learned in Ukraine, can cause potential conflict. And so it's important that these people are not left isolated, but brought into the culture and ideas of their nation.
In the highlands of eastern Turkey, a series of remarkable structures litter a dry plateau cut through by a steep river gorge.
In the magnificent landscape of this plateau, there's some 30 to 40 structures, all different styles of architecture in different states of repair.
Some of the walls have completely fallen away, and the interiors are entirely exposed to the elements.
But there's little to explain the presence of such grand buildings on the desiccated plain.
You notice that they all have a religious feel. You see faded inscriptions, you see haloed figures.
Inside the churches, there are whitewashed walls and the faces on paintings have been removed.
An inscription reveals they might be concealing something extraordinary.
Written on this half-collapsed church is an inscription that it once housed a fragment of the cross, meaning the cross on which Jesus Christ was crucified.
Dr. Mohammed Arslan has been leading excavation of this site for years. Few know more than he about this extraordinary claim. But reading this site is by no means easy.
Şu an neredeyse kentin %80'i toprak altında, tabir caizse uykusuna devam etmekte. Amacımız bu eserleri, bu şehri uykusundan uyandırmak ve yer altında kalan büyük bir alan, yani 100 hektarlık bir alandan söz etmekteyiz. Bu da 1 milyon metrekarelik bir alana tekabül etmekte.
Centuries of decay mean the real secrets here lie buried deep. But ruins on the surface speak to its religious importance.
O yüzden 100 metrede ötede bir kilise varken 100 metre gerisinde bir camiyle, bir mescitle karşılaşabilirsin.
Dr. Arslan's team have unearthed traces to suggest this is some kind of early metropolis.
There's evidence of settlement on the site as old as 2500 BCE, and the city itself was formed about 1600 years ago.
Sadece surlara değil, aslında surları görünce, surların ihtişamını görünce ihtişamlı bir kente girdiğin.
This is the medieval Armenian city of Ani.
In the 4th century, on the orders of King Tridad III, the Armenian kingdom adopted Christianity. It was one of the first kingdoms to do so.
It achieved fame and wealth under successive Armenian dynasties in the 10th and 11th centuries.
A clue to the source of this extraordinary wealth is this crumbling bridge, a crucial juncture on the ancient Silk Road.
Çünkü İpek Yolu Köprüsü'yle birlikte Orta Asya'dan Ön Asya'ya geçişin bağlantısı kurulmuş ve aynı zamanda Kafkaslardan da Anadolu'ya geçişin önemli noktalarından birisi.
The riches of the Silk Road came right here to this very bridge. One can only imagine the wonders and wealth that crossed it.
With its booming trade, the city grew to be one of the largest in all of Asia Minor.
The population grew to 100,000 by the 11th century, and in comparison, London perhaps had around 15,000 at this time.
It attracted not only traders, but also pilgrims, drawn by the claim that Ani concealed an ancient Christian relic.
There was a strong Christian tradition in the region, and in 1035, a church was built here with a very particular purpose, to house a piece of the true cross.
Özellikle Ortaçağ kaynaklarında yapının temelinde Hazreti İsa'nın çarmıha gerildiği ahşap parçaların bu kilisenin temelinde kullanıldığına dair.
But in 1064, not long after the church was built, Ani was attacked by hostile Seljuk Turks.
The story goes that they took the city in brutal fashion, armed with a knife in each hand and another one gripped between their teeth.
To demonstrate Islam's power, clergy and monks were burned to death, while others were flayed alive from head to toe.
Now under the rule of the Turkish Seljuks, Ani's churches were converted to mosques, and references to a relic from Christ's cross were erased. And this friction would continue for centuries.
Ani bildiğiniz üzere Bagratlılar, Selçuklular ve Gürcüler tarafından 3 farklı medeniyet tarafından Orta Çağ'da sürekli el değiştirmiş kadim bir kent.
In the Church of St. Gregory of Tigran-Honents, all these influences are on clear display.
But when you enter the building, it transports you into the past with the evidence of different faiths all over the walls. You have Ottoman carvings, you have Armenian frescoes, and then you have Christian paintings as well.
The city itself, however, did not survive the constant change of rule.
Ve ardından 1634 yılında geçirdiği bir büyük depremden sonra savaşlardan, işgallerden, depremlerden bunalan Anililer artık yavaş yavaş şehri terk etmeye başladılar.
And in the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire ordered that all remains of the city be wiped from the face of the earth. Thankfully, one commander disobeyed orders, so the ruins still exist today. Meanwhile, Turkish Muslims massacred thousands of Armenian Christians and civilians and displaced many more.
Actual number of Armenians that were deported, displaced, killed during this Turkish operation to remove them from Armenia is still very much in dispute.
In 1993, Turkey closed its border with Armenia, and there's still a lot of tension between the two over religious belief, national identity, and military and cultural matters as well.
Located directly on this contentious border, the ruins of Ani lay closed off for decades. Ani's history may be written, but its place in the modern world still leaves many questions unanswered.
We're looking at a place that's really at the crossroads of all kinds of economic, territorial, and military activity.
Ani's position in Turkey's borderlands had rendered it inaccessible.
Until recently, you needed official permission to even come here, given that it was a military zone.
But of late, teams of archaeologists have been allowed to explore and map and record the site, and there's a real wealth of historical information here to be discovered.
And Dr. Arslan is committed to unearthing all the secrets that remain here.
İnanıyorum ki kazılarımız devam ettiği sürece, bizden sonraki yüzyıllarda da devam ettiği sürece kente dair, bu kentin insanlarına dair gizemli her şeyin ortaya çıkacağına inanıyorum.